You know, the last, I mean, that stuff is the stuff, you know, is, it's about, my role is to be a catalyst for those things and to help create the platform for other people to do. And that's where my strength is. So we'll let these guys come up, and I think Theaster, you're going to come up next. And okay, thank you.
How y'all doing? All right. It's really nice to be here, Houston. The question of social practice is one that I've had to kind of wrestle with a whole lot. Wrestle with it because I think that the terms that we conjure to try to make sense of a particular artistic moment, sometimes those terms are inadequate for the work that's being done. But historians and social theorists, even artists attempting to self-define, are trying to make sense of a moment, because sometimes when we can name a moment, then we can group a bunch of people. We can, like a word like placemaking, we could create a language for a thing that creates new resource that goes out to the world, or it justifies a kind of existence for a group of people. Like, we are placemakers, and the federal government will give us money because we're placemakers, and then we will make your place. But what I thought I'd do, Rick, since this is in part three artists approaching the possibility of impactfulness, and whether you think you're doing that and it's a kind of justice or an activism, or sometimes when I talk about it, it's just kind of like it's just kind of a byproduct of being human, that we should be generous and that. I thought I would at least share with you guys the kinds of questions that I ask myself, and the kinds of questions that I've been asking myself over the last several years. It'll take less than 10 minutes because there ain't that many questions. I've often asked myself, why do I feel the urgency to do things beyond my studio? A University of Chicago Business School grad said, Theaster, nothing's going to make you money like art. And so why would you do anything else but commit yourself to making as many fire hose paintings as you can in a day? It's like, who in the hell said that money was the governing factor of the work that we do? That we would use every hour to be the highest yielding fiscal hour. And that a studio practice today seems, by and large, like it's a practice that yields things that yield cash. And that the sensibility of an artistic practitioner is parallel to that of a banker or a capitalist mogul. That I'd like to think that artists are still thinking about other things, that we make for lots of different reasons, that the act of creation is one that is first about creating. Right? And that if we were to look at the act of creating, the work that in fact made us need a studio, that creation could in fact happen anywhere. That maybe my greatest preoccupation is a preoccupation with the ability to transform things. That thing could be anything. It's not just the transformation of a piece of wood or a piece of clay or an old hymn, turning it into a New Jack hymn. But that I'm interested in the act of transformation. That I like when things are different as a result of them coming through my body or through my brain. It's a good feeling. And so I've committed myself to this idea of transforming. And I am trained differently than a lot of people. And I think that for all of us who are, trained in the things that we're trained in, you find a guy who studied English as an undergrad and then they became an MFA, and you find that, oh my God, they're making things about writing. You find a person that had a passion for science as an undergrad, they go to grad school and they're making biology art. That there's a kind of disciplinary ally that sits alongside one's compulsion to make and transform. And when you put those things together, you get a new way of making. I'm a planner. I don't like saying I'm a planner. I wish I could just say I'm an artist, but I think saying I'm a planner means something. It may mean that then the city and its problems, the city is my medium. That maybe the problem of the city is in fact my raw material and not the piece of wood. The piece of wood fits somewhere in there. What is this urgency to do things beyond the studio? The urgency is that the studio wasn't the core place for me, it was in fact the city. I could also ask, what is the nature of this moment, this artistic moment, this cultural moment? And then how are artists needed? I ask myself that question sometimes. Why is this conversation around justice and action an important one today? Maybe the biggest question that I ask in my artistic practice is, what's the best form by which I can celebrate, question, antagonize, rebuke, politicize the things that I'm thinking about? So that that sometimes the best form is the creation of a not-for-profit. That the not-for-profit might be the form by which I deliver the message that I want to share. And then other times the form might be what one might consider a traditional work of art. That sometimes, like Rick will talk about how important it is that the work we do as artists remains symbolic. Rick talks about symbolic. That in a way, I found that there are some times when those forms are in fact not symbolic, that they're hyper-pragmatic. Like they're just kind of, you end up with some affordable housing. The form is a response to a particular need, and that need happens to rest outside of the museum. Right? That there are ways in which if we were to expand, like we're creative, if we were to expand how we imagine the scope of responsibility that artists had in the world, then we might find ourselves thinking about things beyond our studio space in the museum, in somebody's living room. That really, it would be the commitment to transformation. Thank you.
Size thing. Listen to get him back. Listen to Rick and thinking about 20 years of what Rick has created here, and true, sort of talking about social practice and kind of pushing back on that, and even thinking about Theaster and how so much of his practice is kind of so connected, what's happening inside of the studio and outside the studio. And I realized that for me, the social part of my work, I'm sure that most of you understand my work probably from a studio background. I do mainly painting and sculpture, and I'm mainly in the studio. But before I went to school, and I've always been the same person, I was basically in the service industry. I was probably a hairstylist for 20 years. And I even put myself through school being a hairstylist in the same community that my studio is in. It's in Leimert Park, which is kind of a creative, cultural part of Los Angeles. So I was a hairdresser there, and I was going to school. And when I started thinking about the idea of the social, and the fact that in the art world we had to make a category for basically people that exist outside of this kind of small network of people that we've kind of developed, it made me start to think that, has the social always been there, and have we always been engaging with it? And are we just creating, I remember Thelma's show Freestyle, I was in Freestyle, and I flew to New York being black, because I was in that show, and I flew back being post-black. And that was an interesting thing, because I looked in the mirror and I was the same person. But the conversation around what it meant to be black was really what we were trying to talk about, pushing forward and moving into different things. So it sparked a conversation. So I wonder if the social has always been here. It's always been something we've always been negotiating with, but yet throwing light on it or creating a site of investigation is making people think. I think that the most interesting part for me, when I was in the hair salon and giving the Foucault reader to my client, because I'm like curling hair and also like asking her to read it back to me. And so we're having an exchange. We're actually having a post-studio exchange in my understanding. And I was very comfortable with that. So what I learned even before I went to school is that information, dumbing down information for people because we assume the communities won't understand the information is actually where we go wrong as an arts community. I think that when I went to school and became an artist, and then I became a painter, which was very sort of hermetic in a way, I really never lost the social side of myself. Every day I was walking in the community, they knew me as a hairdresser, then they knew me as an artist, but I was constantly interacting. I never saw the difference between what I was doing in the studio and what I was doing in the community. So Art and Practice, which is basically contemporary art and social service, we work with foster kids with TAYs. I didn't see it as something outside of what I had experienced. I saw it as an extension. I didn't make a huge difference between what I do in the studio and the desire to do art and practice. When I was 12 years old, I moved from all black Los Angeles to all white Santa Monica, and I would go back and forth with my mom to the hair salon. My mother never made a difference between Santa Monica and the studio. We would just go on the 10 freeway from Santa Monica to the... And so if you don't make a difference in difference, I don't really think that there is a difference. And so there is a part of me economically, because of some things that I've done in the studio, that is able to push the whole conversation forward. So what's kind of exciting to me and how I connect with them is to not make a difference, just to be in a place, in a community, and be part of that community as you always have been. I don't make that much of a difference in Leimert Park. They understand who I was, and they understand who I am now, and whatever we're going to be in the future is up for grabs. And I think that that's kind of what we all have in common, is a desire to resist definitions of what community or social practice means, and to kind of actually ask questions more than solve a lot of the, sort of come up with easy equations and easy answers. So that's, go ahead.
I think it brought up some really wonderful jumping off points for us to have a conversation. I think some of the things that Mark brought up and even Theaster brought up have a lot to do with the idea of reframing this idea of social engagement and social practice. Taking something that has really been framed as an intellectual endeavor. As you said, it's always been there to a large extent, and reclaiming that in an interesting way. So I'd like to talk about this idea of you all working in places where, Rick, you didn't grow up here. You grew up in, is it Arkansas? Alabama. Oh, the other end, sorry. But being here for a long length of time, there has to be a real trust. As you say, people knew who you were and they know who you are. Same way with you, Theaster, having been born and raised in Chicago. Talk about that space of trust, the space of really going into a community, the Magnificent Seven coming in and reclaiming the abandoned spaces and the interchange and the interactions with that community to earn that level of trust. Because I think you're taking for granted the power that you have to transform your communities. What you're doing, and certainly Rick, they've asked you to come and reimagine spaces in other cities, in LA, in Birmingham, for instance, and how those things don't necessarily work because it doesn't come from within. So talk a bit about the organic nature and the trust and the engagement of communities that you're now working with. I'll start with you, Rick, since you're the eldest.
Okay, I'll start because, it's interesting to have this conversation here in Houston because, I know so, as I think about the questions that run through my mind, there's always people around the neighborhood that I go to have these conversations and try to find ways of thinking about it. And right now, when you talk about the issue of trust, I go back and I wish he was here. I know his health is not really good right now, but State Representative Garnett Coleman, I don't think he's here, but I had lunch with him a couple of days ago, and Garnett was really funny. I've learned a lot from him because we got off on a bad note in the beginning. He knew what we were doing at Project Four Houses. He didn't want to stop it. He didn't want to do that, but he did not have a good opinion. And basically, it was a trust issue. It wasn't until about 4 years ago we had a conversation, and he told me that. And I don't think I can remember the story. I'm going to try it. But he was telling me the story of the chicken and the pig. He says, one day there was a farm with the chicken and the pig, and they hung out all the time, they got along, whatever. And one day the chicken goes up to the pig and says, hey, let's eat something different today. Let's not eat that hay stuff, whatever. Let's try something different. And the pig said, like what? He said, some bacon and eggs. And so the pig looked and said, wait a minute. For you that's something different, but for me it's a sacrifice, you just lay an egg, but I gotta lose, and so his point was that, you came into this community as someone from the outside and you wanted to lay an egg, and have some fun or whatever, but it's like, you don't have any skin in this game. It's like you don't have any skin in it, so you need to be really careful about how you come in, and start this. And I did not understand that from that perspective. So it's and you do as much as you can to try to gain as much trust as possible from folks. But there's always, and I tell people this now, I've been in this neighborhood, I've been working in this neighborhood for nearly 20 years, and have lived here for about 16, but I still don't claim that this is my neighborhood. I still know that that there are people here who don't have the same kind of mobility that I have. I can pick up and go somewhere else and be, just fine. But there are people who have, stakes here that for generations, and so it's a different kind of thing. So, and I think that's one of the ways of gaining the trust, though, is by allowing people to know that you're not trying to lay claim to something that they feel most strongly about.
Yeah. So, I mean, Rick is right. You know, he was saying that the three of us work differently, and lately I've been having to talk about this a lot because people have been asking, like, you know, what kind of impact do I think I'm making in my neighborhood? And they want me to talk about that as a kind of metric that says, you know, like, before I started working at Dorchester, you know, there was 70% abandonment, 65% abandonment. After 7 years, there's 13% abandonment, and the 13% abandonment is because those buildings are in arbitration, that we've created 150 jobs. There's been impacted $30 million over 6 years. So, and all of that stuff, I've had to figure out like what that means, what a metric is, whatever. That wasn't my goal, even though those things were happening. But I do think that in a way, when you talk about the question of trust, it does assume a certain kind of outsiderness and then a certain kind of insiderness. When I moved to the block, I was just a dude on the block. I had my house, and I lived in my house. And my neighbors knew I was broke. I talked about this a lot. So I would borrow food from my neighbors. And I had my little day job, and they thought it was cute that I worked at the University of Chicago and I still didn't have no money. That's the life of a professor. That's how it works. It's all prestige. And so for those first couple years, I was just a neighbor. There was no big sign on the outside saying I want to help. There was no grand gesture toward like a social service agency. We would open the house up on Saturdays and we'd say, yo, tell the kids to come over. And I need some bread. And if they're gonna eat, y'all should unthaw one of them home run and frozen. You know, it was real easy like that. And so I think that part of what's been working is that I just stayed long enough, that my economic circumstance changed enough, that as a neighbor, and there were other neighbors on the block, I say this, other people on the block owned more than one building. That wasn't, the folk who were homeowners, that wasn't a big deal. Because we all knew that land was available and buildings were available, but it was about a certain willingness to communicate more complicated things as my economic circumstance changed. Because then we had busloads of people coming in and coming to the block and saying, oh my God, we love this. We saw it in Germany. We want to see the Huguenot house in America. You know, and when a big bus of 65 white people drive up on the block, it is really different.